The message arrived through a back channel that had not been used in 11 years. A Swiss diplomatic intermediary based in Geneva received an encrypted communication at 1400 hours on a Thursday afternoon that was addressed to no one by name, signed by no one by title, and contained exactly 43 words in Farsi. Translated by a CIA linguist in Langley within 6 minutes of receipt, those 43 words said the following: "The Islamic Republic is prepared to discuss a framework for cessation of hostilities on a confidential basis through mutually acceptable intermediaries, with no preconditions on either side, at a time and location of American choosing." The CIA director read the translation twice, picked up the secure line to the National Security Advisor, and said 4 words: "Tehran wants to talk." After 47 days of the most intense aerial bombardment campaign conducted against any nation since the Second World War, after 23 waves of Iranian missiles shot down over Israel without a single one reaching its target, after the destruction of 60% of Iran's strategic military infrastructure, the Islamic Republic had blinked. The question was whether anyone would let them. The back-channel response from Washington was cautious and deliberate. The CIA director flew to Geneva on a military aircraft logged as a routine diplomatic courier flight, meeting the Swiss intermediary at a private residence outside the city at 0200 hours the following morning. The American position was communicated clearly. The United States was willing to facilitate a conversation, but any framework would need to include verifiable suspension of uranium enrichment, withdrawal of all IRGC forces from Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen, release of all American citizens held in Iranian custody, and a binding commitment to halt weapons transfers to Hezbollah and Hamas. These were not opening negotiating positions designed to be bargained down. They were the floor. The Swiss intermediary flew to Tehran the same day. The Iranian response came back within 18 hours, conditional agreement on 3 of the 4 points, with the IRGC withdrawal from Lebanon described as requiring more time and a different framework given the complexity of Hezbollah's relationship with the Lebanese state. It was not a yes, but it was close enough to a yes that the CIA director called it the most significant Iranian diplomatic signal in 20 years. What neither Washington nor Tehran had fully calculated was Israel. The Israeli Prime Minister had been briefed on the Geneva back channel by Israeli intelligence within 4 hours of the CIA director's flight to Switzerland, a demonstration of how completely Unit 8200 had penetrated the diplomatic communications infrastructure being used for the talks. The Israeli cabinet convened an emergency session at 0300 hours, and the debate lasted 40 minutes. The Prime Minister's position was unambiguous and had been stated publicly 3 weeks earlier in a speech to the Knesset that Al Jazeera had broadcast across the Arab world. Israel had already warned that it would target anyone attempting to appoint a new Iranian leader or reconstruct the Iranian military command structure, and a ceasefire that left the Islamic Republic's governing apparatus intact was, in Israel's strategic assessment, not a ceasefire at all. It was a pause that would allow Iran to rebuild, rearm, and try again in 5 years. Israel had not absorbed 23 waves of Iranian missiles and lost 340 civilians to accept a pause. It had absorbed them to achieve a permanent change in Iran's capacity and willingness to threaten Israeli existence. The cabinet vote on whether to continue strikes was 14-2. Wave 8 was authorized before dawn. The Israeli Air Force launched Wave 8 at 0415 hours, 41 F-35 high Edir stealth fighters carrying a combined payload of Rampage supersonic missiles and GBU-28 bunker penetrators targeting the 11 remaining high-value targets that Israeli intelligence had been holding in reserve precisely for this moment. The targets were not military installations. They were the institutional pillars of the Iranian state's ability to reconstitute its military power, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, personnel records and officer training infrastructure at 3 locations in Tehran and Isfahan. The Iranian Ministry of Defense Procurement network's primary logistics hub outside Shiraz. The Shahid Hamad Industrial Group's main missile design facility, where the next generation of Iranian ballistic missiles was being developed, and 4 underground vaults containing Iran's strategic weapons program technical documentation that Israeli intelligence had located through a combination of satellite imagery analysis and human intelligence developed over 8 years. Israel was not bombing buildings. It was bombing institutional memory.
It was ensuring that even if Iran signed every piece of paper Washington put in front of it,
the knowledge and infrastructure required to restart the weapons programs would not be there when the ink dried. The strikes hit at 0431 hours, and the CIA director learned about them at 0437 hours, when the duty officer in Geneva called to report that the Swiss intermediary had just received an emergency communication from Tehran suspending all back-channel contact with immediate effect. The Iranian message was brief. How can we negotiate with a country that cannot control its ally? It was a fair question with a complicated answer. The United States and Israel are not in a command relationship. America does not tell Israel when to strike and when to stop, and Israel does not ask American permission before executing operations it has determined are essential to its national security. The CIA director called the Israeli Prime Minister's office at 0445 hours. The conversation lasted 7 minutes and was described by both sides afterward as direct. The Israeli position had not changed. The strikes were complete. The targets were gone. And if Iran wanted to talk about peace, Israel was not opposed to peace. It was opposed to a peace that left Iran with the ability to restart the programs that had launched 23 waves of missiles at Israeli cities. Washington found itself in the position it had occupied throughout this conflict, the indispensable mediator between an Iranian government that had started a war it could no longer win, and an Israeli government determined to ensure it could never start another one. The back channel did not stay closed. By the following evening, the Swiss intermediary had returned to Tehran, and a 43-word message had become a 40-page draft framework that CIA analysts and Israeli intelligence liaisons were both annotating simultaneously in a process that had no precedent in the diplomatic history of the Middle East. Iran was at the table because it had no military options remaining. Israel was at the table because it had achieved every military objective it set at the beginning of the war and could afford to let diplomacy finish what its air force had started. America was at the table because the world's economy, its alliance structure, and its credibility as the indispensable nation all required it to be. The war that had begun with 47 days of the most intense aerial bombardment in modern history was ending not with a surrender ceremony or a final decisive battle, but with 43 words in Farsi set through a Swiss intermediary in Geneva and an Israeli air force that had made absolutely certain, in the hours between that message and any possible reply, that there would be nothing left to negotiate about rebuilding.